Hello, everyone, and welcome. We will get started shortly. I want to thank you for joining us. I want to invite you to use the chat to introduce yourself and tell us where you're joining us from. Hello, everyone, and welcome. We are going to start in 1 minute. I'm so grateful that you're able to join us today, and I want to invite you to use the chat to introduce yourself and tell us where you are joining us from. All right. So I want to thank you all for joining us. I do want to mention that this is a webinar that I'm offering for the community. My name is Nays Imad, and I'm offering this webinar for a variety of reasons that I'm going to share with you. The webinar is being recorded. If you wish, if you don't want to be recorded, I'm going to ask that you turn off your camera, and I will share the recording with you and your colleagues at the end of the webinar. So I want to start with, I want to ask you to consider the following question. And really, it's really important that I center well-being for me, not just today, but always. And so I want to invite you, whether you're with us on Zoom or watching on YouTube live stream, I want you to invite you to go to menti.com and answer this question, how you are feeling right now. And I'm going to put that into the chat. And I'm going to use the Menti, and we will start. All right, so you could either put the number that is there, or you could go into, I just put a link in there, and I'm going to stop sharing for a moment so I could show them the Menti. Right here. Right. So I choose to start with this question, whether I'm teaching or whether I'm working with colleagues, because I want to know how the community is doing. And I want us to also have a sense of how we are feeling. And I want to not just say we need to center well-being, we need to see how we are doing. It's also important to designate time for it. And so it's an exercise that I've been doing at the beginning of my sessions and at the end of my sessions, is to really ask this question of how you are doing. And if you're not using Menti, that's totally fine. You could use the chat to enter how you are doing. And I want you to consider what you're looking at. And so we have a community of beloveds. We have a community of educators. We have people here today gathered to discuss, to learn about healing and recovery and hope as we continue to feel overwhelmed and tired and exhausted. And so you're not alone, and we are in this journey together. And what I hope to do today is to look back at where we were, and also to reflect on where we're going, to look at the future. And so with that, I want to begin by inviting you. This is a practice I learned from one of my colleagues, Resma Minikam, who wrote this really beautiful book, My Grandmother's Hand. And his way of acknowledging the land is he invites us to say, you know, that something happened on the land that we stand on, that our feet are touching. And it's important to connect with that land and to connect with the history and to honor the land, to learn about it, to honor it, to remember that we belong, we come from the land, and we go back to the land. And so with that, I want to start the presentation. I thank all of you for joining me today. And I'm going to stop sharing the Menti so we could start the presentation. And you have to bear with me. I did not anticipate this overwhelming with great turnout. And so there's just me, and I'm navigating the tools. So if you could bear with me. All right, so let's get started. And what I would like to do today, and again, I invite you to use the chat to comment, to ask questions. We will have time at the end for questions and answers. What I would like to do today is to reflect back on last year. And then after that, we are going to consider how are we going to move forward. And then in doing so, we're going to interrogate the notions of safety, the notion of connection, well-being, and finally, we will end with what does it mean to cultivate revolutionary hope. So last year on March 26, I presented a webinar on trauma-informed teaching. And really what I was doing was trying to understand my own trauma and how I'm going to move forward. And I shared with those of you who were able to join me last year this article, which came from the Johns Hopkins. And it was an article looking at the unequal cost of social distancing and what that is going to do to us individually. What is it going to do to the community? And the article talked about those who were already struggling and those who are who had no support system. So then after that, we really went into this uncharted territory. And this uncharted territory, I mean, how could we have known what to do? We really struggled. We were, in a way, making the way as we were walking. So Antonio, the Spanish poet Antonio Machado said, he says, "Wanderer, your footsteps are the road and nothing more. Wanderer, there is no road. The road is made by walking. By walking, one makes the road, and upon glancing back, glancing behind, one sees the path that never will be trod again." So in a way, we had to make the road, whether you are in the sector of teaching or healthcare or community work, we had to make the road as we were walking. And so that webinar that I gave last year was a way for me to connect with you, was a way for me to connect with students, with beloved, with the trauma, and try to understand. And in a way, it was trying to understand, how am I going to move forward? And so fast forward to today, there was an article of this March, and this article was written by Julia Rice, who interviewed several mental health practitioners. And the article, the title is, "It's Not Just You, A Lot of Us Are Hitting a Pandemic Wall Right Now." The article talks about our struggle, and I think I saw this picture and I thought this was really powerful. And I was thinking, well, where am I here? Right? Am I this just reaching this burnout, or have I reached it? And in the article, one of the mental health experts that were quoted, Amy Sirbis, says, "We're at a more risk for burnout because of the circumstances and because of the fact that we're continually re-traumatized and reactivating that cortisol spike," right? And so as I read this, my initial reaction was, wait a second, is there hope? Are we going to ever recover from this? And what I want to share with you today is, yes, we will. And yes, there is hope. And we do so in community. That road we made by walking, we didn't make it alone. We made it with and within community. And I want to invite you to center well-being and center the community. So how do we heal, right? How do we heal our broken hearts, the grief that perhaps we haven't even began to interrogate? How do we heal our sense of loneliness and our sense of hopelessness? And what I want to share with you is the following. So I believe that there are 3 preconditions for every human being to be able to thrive in life. And those 3 preconditions, we want to feel safe, we want to feel connected, and we want to have the support network. We want to have the resources. So what I want to do in this presentation today, I want to talk about, what can we do to feel safe? What can we do to feel connected? And what can we do to feel a sense of support and resources? The presentation today, it is meant to be for everybody, for educators, for parents, for students. It's really what I did. I curated the research from neuroscience to back up these three notions, that we want to feel safe, connected, and supported. And so I'm going to share some examples, and I'm going to share the science, and then I want to end with interrogating this notion of hope. Now, I want to be very clear that what I say today is something that, if it resonates with you, take it, and if it doesn't, then walk away from it. And I also want to be clear that what I say today is not meant to undermine the immensity of the trauma, the grief, the heartbreak. And so when we talk about hope and when we talk about celebration of this journey, of this road that got us here, it is not by any means going to trivialize or undermine the pain. So to feel safe, so what I offer here is that feeling safe, we could use the reducing uncertainty. What we experienced over the past year is an overwhelming sense of uncertainty, which makes our brain feels unsafe. And so part of the trauma that we're experiencing is the brain is not designed, it is not meant to deal with this ongoing uncertainty. And so what I say is I'm going to talk about listening to our hearts. I'm going to talk about information overload. And then I will talk about what does it mean to, if we have predictability as an antidote to uncertainty. And I will present research from neuroscience. I'm also going to talk about how can we leverage communication. And leveraging communication is I'm going to talk about how can we connect through communication and invite, model empathy in our communication, and really this notion of why we do what we do in addition to what we're doing. So at the bottom of this pyramid is going to be, I'm going to share research that is going to support these notions. And as I said, please use the chat as much as you want. If I mention something and there is an article, put it into the chat. This is meant to be a community event. And so there was research we've known about for a long time, the connection between the heart and the mind, the heart and the brain. And more recently, this article beautifully articulates that the connection between the heart and the brain. When the brain feels uncertain, it's a state of stress because the brain is like a predictive machine. And we want to predict what's going to happen the next minute and the next minute to ensure our survivability. So when we experience uncertainty, am I going back to face or am I not going back? Am I going to have a vaccine? Am I not going to have a vaccine? Am I going to see etc.? It is overwhelming for the brain. Now, traditionally, what we've known, this is what the authors say, we normally think of the heart pumping blood while the brain takes care of perception. However, the heart and the brain collaborate to better understand the world. When the brain is uncertain, the heart helps out by quieting down. And so what the researcher did is they looked at the variability, how much the heart rate changes when the brain is experiencing the uncertainty. So in the contemplative science practices, and in a lot of traditions, Eastern traditions, this notion of listening to the heart, I had a conversation with one of my sisters, Dr. Mahad Ali. I hope she's with us today, who we talked about the notion of asking, how is your heart, right? When you ask somebody, how are you? How are you doing? And then this, how is your heart? And a lot of us right now, our hearts are breaking, not just because we experience loss, but we also saw how many people have and are experiencing losses. And so a lot of traditions say, put your hand on your heart and just, how is your heart? Be in tune with that. And the research backs that up. So this variability in the heart rate, right? What we know that there is a correlation when we're able to tune into the heart and reach that coherence, that correlates with positive emotions, help us reach that coherence. When we appreciate others, when we feel love or share love with others. And we know that that correlates, it helps with performance, whether it's academic performance or job performance. So what does it mean moving forward to tune in to the heart? I mentioned Resmaa Menakem, and Resmaa Menakem talks about healing, and he and others, trauma practitioners, talk about healing and going into the body. We store trauma in the body. So what does it mean to go beyond the cognitive and go to the body, to the heart? So moving on, reducing and focusing information. We are overloaded with information, and a lot of times there's no filtering. And so we know that there is research, and I think a lot of us, we know intuitively that just being glued to the news, it impacts our well-being. We know that there is research, and specifically there's research now coming out after COVID-19 and how this, what it does when we're constantly reading the news, or it adds to that sense of uncertainty and that sense of hopelessness or helplessness, right? I'm not saying don't listen to the news, I'm not saying that, but really we need to be very careful, curate information and focus the information. In a way, we're trying to reduce the stress on the brain. The third one is creating predictable structures. So what that means in the work that we do, whether we're working with students, whether we're working with staff members, when I create a structure that is reliable and is predictable, what do I mean by predictable? My students know that every Tuesday they have to turn something in, and every Friday they have to post something. What that's going to do to the brain is when I make that prediction and I'm successful, there's positive reinforcement, right? So in a way, we're negotiating with the brain. We're reconnecting with the heart to help the brain relax. We're creating these predictable routine or structures to do what? So we could help the brain experience that positive reinforcement. Communication, leveraging communication. So how can we communicate empathically? So what we know from the research, this is an article from 2014 and more recently, looking at the what communication, when we don't just communicate, but we communicate in an intentional way to impart empathy, right? What it does, it helps us feel connected. And again, that sense of connection can then take away from the pain of isolation. And so what I invite you to do is, whether you're sending an email or sending a text message, what does it mean to send that message in an empathic way? This requires us to do what? To pause and to have intentionality every step of the way. Okay, so in this one, communicate to reassure. A lot of what I'm going to say to you today centers or is grounded in the notion of interpersonal neurobiology, which was developed by Dan Siegel. And it's this notion that what I do, that our brains they are social organs. Sure, there are chemicals and neurons and electricity and so on, and they are social organs. What that means is what I do, the smile that I have on my face, calling you beloved, saying I miss you, wishing that my colleague is here, right? Those things send subtle, profound messages to your brain that say what? I am with, I am part of. So this notion of interpersonal neurobiology tells us what? That we could reestablish harmony in the brain that was derailed during the pandemic when we're intentional in our communication and in our interaction with our colleagues. Because then what happens when you feel that my smile is genuine and is trying to connect, what happens is then it impacts you and then it reverberates. It impacts me in turn, right? So sharing the what and the why. So a lot of times when the brain is experiencing a lot of stress, what it does is it tries to focus on solving this stressful situation. Yes. And sometimes what we need to do, we need to remind our brains why what we do matters, why what we do has an implication. So really the theme of what I'm going to talk about today is connections and community. And the brain wants to feel those connections and community. So metacognitive emotional regulation, this article was from 10 years ago, and we know that, there's more research that supports it. So in this case, what the researchers did, what the teachers did, is work with eighth graders to help them with what? To help them with developing metacognitive strategies. And those metacognitive strategies included stating the goals, stating the why. Why am I doing this? Why am I, right? And again, this could be in the classroom. This could be with your children at home, right? And then connecting the why to something that's bigger, my community, the world, the globe. What that does in turn, it helps us when we encounter negative emotions. It helps us regulate our reactions. So I said that safety is really important. And the second thing that I want to talk about is connections. And we could cultivate connections by cultivating community and identifying meanings. How do we do that? I'm going to talk about nurturing the inner home or the inner world. I will talk about what does it mean to wonder and reflect and investigate. And then I'm going to talk about the community. And then when we talk about meanings, I will share data about, again, establishing, reaffirming our goals. I'm going to talk about identifying the why in a bigger sense beyond the task that I'm focusing on right now. And then I want to talk about what happens to the brain when we celebrate milestones. So in the Celtic tradition, and John O'Donohue, who is a philosopher and a theologian and a poet, talks a lot about the inner landscape. In this book of Celtic tradition, Anamkara, he talks about cultivating an interiority. And so he says you should belong first in your own interiority. If you belong there and if you are in rhythm with yourself, connected to that deep, unique source within, then you will never be vulnerable when your outside belonging is qualified, relativized, or taken away. John O'Donohue says that he talks about hospitality, and he says that you must stand at the door of your own heart, welcoming yourself. Part of the pain we have felt over the past year the grief, the trauma, is the disconnection from the community. And that disconnection was then felt deeply, in part because the communities, our colleagues, our friends, the barista at the coffee shop, they reinforce our sense of being, right? And so when I say nurture, and I think O'Donoghue beautifully says, stand at the door of your heart, welcome yourself, right? It's going to do what? It's that listening to the heart. And when we feel connected within, it helps us feel the connections in the outside and even cultivate those. The reconnecting with nature and to wonder, right? So this is research that was published 2 years ago. And again, this is not the only one. This is not the first. And what this showed actually is they looked at clinicians. They worked with people who are experiencing chronic stress and trauma. And part of the therapeutics, if you will, was to ask that part of the therapy is to go outside, connect with nature, leave your phone outside, right? It's this, and what the conclusion was is that what they found is the in some cases, so the result provide a validated starting point for healthcare practitioners prescribing a nature pill. So this nature pill did what? They measured people's cortisol level. And cortisol level, remember I started with that quote about cortisol, it peaks up when we're under a lot of stress. And in the patients that were prescribed the nature pill, go outside, connect with the earth, connect with nature, let your eyes, look at greens. And what they saw is there was at least an 18% reduction in the cortisol, right? And so what does it mean to cultivate, for example, for us who teach a pedagogy of kindness, a pedagogy of care, and also a pedagogy of connecting with the earth, right? Connecting with nature. And then finally, and I would say most importantly, checking up on each other. So in this study from 2017, and what and actually there was a paper that came before from the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA. They looked at communities that experience disasters. So you could argue that we, the world, the community, experience disasters. And what they saw, they looked at how they recovered. Did they fall into the abyss of trauma, or were they able to move forward and recover? And the sense of community and moving together was a powerful factor. So in this case, what they say, the findings here, like the whole community document that was released in 2011, they highlight the importance of understanding the community, building relationships, empowering actions, and fostering social capital to build a whole community approach. And you could reflect on your own experience. What uplifts your spirit? When you feel a meaningful relationship. One of my colleagues, Peter Felton and Leo Lambert, published a book last year, Relationship Rich Education. And they traveled the country and they interviewed educators, they interviewed students. And the theme that what helps students flourish, thrive, it's the relationship they feel, they experience, right? And so this centering the community, check up on each other, make it part of your culture, that Your students check up on each other. You check up on the students. I remember I was teaching several years ago, and we had a student, Tina, who didn't come to class for 2 weeks. And the students decided to, they took a piece of paper, it wasn't anything fancy, and they wrote on that piece of paper, "We miss you, where are you?" Right? And I remember I still have that piece of paper. I took a picture of it and I sent an email to the student and I said, "We're missing you. The class is not the same." She came right away the following week, right? And that was very powerful for me this summer, because one of my colleagues, they decided to have um, a WhatsApp group. And it's this venting, checking up on each other. And we would meet every other Friday. So here is a picture of, my colleagues, Peter Felton and Susanna McGowan and Brad and Josh and Assis and Peter. And it's this trying to establish normalcy. And then right here, what you see is like, I was having a hard time and I was missing. I just, there were days, didn't get out of bed. And so what they did is like, this was one of those times where they're sending me a message like, "Where are you? We're checking up on you." I tell you what, I saw this picture and I was like, I want to be there, right? I want to be. And so what does it mean to cultivate, those relationships where you check up on each other, and you really feel the longing to be with, to belong. So why do we want to reaffirm goals and to reaffirming the whys, right? So the notion of toxic positivity is something that we really want to be careful with. And what I mean by that is, I am not talking about just saying everything is going to be fine, everything is okay, we got vaccinated, we move forward. No, it's really important that we recognize the pain and the grief and the trauma, right? And there were several articles this last year and more recently looking at the notion of tragic optimism. And that in the midst of the tragedy, in the midst of the trauma, we are capable of cultivating a sense of meaning, a sense of purpose. And what that does to the brain, again, it's negotiating with the brain, right? It's helping the brain be still in the middle of the storm. So how, from this article that was published last month, the author says, how may we begin to reconsider our traumas as not just ending of what is, but beginning of what still might be, as repair without a master plan, right? A lot of people have been talking about going to normal or forging a new normal. And we want to be, again, what does it mean to have a normal, especially from the perspectives of those who were hit the hardest by the pandemic, those whom we looked and we saw that the loss and the suffering they were experiencing. We felt that sense of helplessness. What I'm saying is, we need to resist the temptation to not just go back to the old normal that didn't work for a lot of people, but also to forge a new normal that is going to have many blind spots. Celebrating the journey. So celebrating the journey deals with what? When we experience trauma, it actually physiologically, cognitively, what it does, it shakes our sense of confidence, our sense of, right? Because, and so looking back and saying, we made it, we taught, we homeschooled, we whatever it was, right? And pausing to celebrate it It's that positive reinforcement for the brain. It is not going to take away, and we have to be careful to trivialize or take away from the immensity of the trauma, but it's going to do what? It's going to honor the fact that we paved a road, right? And we're looking back at it. So, if we stick with this notion of walking, Paulo Freire in a conversation with Miles Horton talk about we make the road by walking. He refers to teachers as artists. But being an artist does not mean that he or she can make the profile, can shape the students. What the educator does in teaching is to make it possible for the students to become themselves. It's this empowering, it's this elevating, it's this uplifting, it's this walking the road with them. I think I've shared with a lot of people this painting from a student who, the road we're walking on towards graduation is paved with hope. And so we take the journey together. We walk together with our students. The last piece that I said, safety and connection, and I want to talk about, the last one is support and resources. In the first part, I want to talk about what does it mean to center well-being. And with that, making this, how are you? How is your state? How is your heart central to the work that we do? It's really important. There's still, despite so much research on mental illness, and at one point the CDC said this is the next public health crisis, there's still a lot of stigma, right? It is not, we don't look at mental illness the way we look at diabetes, for example. There's still stigma, so we need to normalize that, and again, center it in the work that we do. And then, what does it mean to intentionally engage in positive emotions? And what does that do to the well-being? And then in the second part, and that's the part we will end with before we do questions and answers and conversation, is this pausing. Bayo Ekomolathi, who is a South African philosopher and teacher and scholar who lives in India, talks about the urgency of the time and the need to pause. Right? So it's urgent, and there is also the need to pause. And what does it mean to cultivate a moral imagination, revolutionary hope? So centering the well-being. Now, we know that pausing and engaging in mindfulness, what that does, it allows us to do what? It allows us to regulate our responses to stress. It's not going to take away the stress, right? And then what happens, this is even more powerful when we do it together. So we are co-regulating. So in this research, they showed that you could help 8th graders, right, develop that, and then it helps with their attention, it helps with their plasticity. And so school-based mindfulness training is linked to the neuroplasticity. It improves cognition. It improves cognition, cognitive control. So when they experience negative emotions, right? Imagine if we taught about the biology of learning, the biology of stress, how empowering it will be for a student to pause and say, oh, I'm scared, and investigate what's going on, versus they react and then they feel bad, and there is that internalizing and self-deficit. This is more powerful when it's done together with the teacher, with the parent, with the health provider. And this is being done, this work is being done beautifully in the K through 12. Now, as an article that was published again recently, looking at the role of the amygdala. And so the amygdala is a structure in the brain that when it's hyperactive, right, it can hijack the rest of the brain. There's an amygdala break or an amygdala hijack, but it's that state of constricting, that state of fear. And then some teachers and therapists, they talk about, what if we could become an amygdala whisperer? And so what that means is that, again, I don't take away what is triggering the trauma. I regulate how I respond to it. So in this article, how our brain reacts to a negative situation. It's not the situation itself, but how our brain's going to react is going to have an influence on our day-to-day psychological well-being. And so again, I go back to, what does it mean to recognize and regulate and co-regulate all of this? And then the last one is this expressing positive emotions. And so positive emotions, again, and I am being intentional to repeat toxic positivity, we're not taken away from the trauma and the pain but we are doing what? We're intentionally telling the brain, I'm grateful for, and then fill in the blank. So those positive emotions, when we experience appreciation and gratitude and being with, right? What they do is they help with the cardiovascular system, the heart, and its connection to the brain. And they help with cognitive tasks, with challenging cognitive tasks. So those, again, experiencing positive emotions, what the authors say, they seem to favor an adaptive psychophysiological response when we are faced with a complex cognitive task. So what I want to end with right now is the resources and the support. I want to end with, what does it mean to cultivate a moral imagination? And what does it mean to cultivate that through revolutionary hope? So if we look at the science of hope, there is quite a bit that has been written about the notion of hope in the with chronic pain, patients that experience chronic pain, patients who are on chemotherapy. In fact, we know that experiencing a sense of hope, it has an impact on the potency of certain therapeutics. You know, in cancer research, in, like I said, in chronic pain. My colleague Denise Larson at the University of Alberta works on hope and what does it mean to document hope and the connection between hope and chronic pain. And we know that when we experience the feeling of hope, the brain is going to release chemicals such as endorphins, and those chemicals, they're going to mimic. They act like analgesic, they reduce our pain. They act like morphines, right? And so we know that this sense of hope, when we experience it and impart it, they can have a healing and a recovery component. Now, I read this article this past summer. I live the hope despite my knowing better. And this part suggests to me that, you know, there's this notion of hope, but then there's this despite my knowing better. And despite my knowing better suggests to me what? that there are reasons to struggle with hope, right? Now, what makes us hope? What makes us hope? It's predicting the future and wanting it to be better. And those predictions, they depend on information we have now. They depend on history, our memories, and what matters to us. So, in fact, this is James Baldwin who said this. I live a hope despite my knowing better. And undoubtedly, James Baldwin had historical, had current at the time reasons against hope. But this and what matters to him, and what matters to him is a better future. It's that moral imagination, a more humane, a more just, something that is equitable and beautiful. And so, how then do we reignite our relationship with hope, with that revolutionary hope? It's something that I struggled with over the summer. It's something that I thought hope is absurd in the middle of ongoing. And I realized that to do that, before we could impart hope, we have to reignite what it means for us to hope. And so I say here, I have a short list of what I invite you to do. And it's important to feel the pain, to feel the disconnect, the discontent, to allow the pain to guide our understanding. In order for us to hope, we have to be in pain and not okay with what the present is. And so we envision something better in the future. And so the feeling is really important. And it's going to be really important as part of the healing story to welcome the feeling, both the negative and the positive, into the academy and work with and let them guide us. But we don't just, when we are with this, this sucks, this is not working, it's not working for everybody, right? We're problem solvers, we're creators, we're creative. What we do is we go on and we say, well, what are the other possibilities? How might this be better, not just for me, but for others, for the community? That moral imagination with specific goals. You could take one aspect of your life. It could be your work, and you're going to focus on this part of your work in the hospital or in the classroom, and you're going to work with it in a way that is going to be improved for the others that you deal with. I give an example of how can we make grading more humane, more centers around learning, as opposed to just evaluating and giving grades and failing. And centering the collective again allows us to do what? It's gonna be a tough journey moving forward. But when I remember that it's more than me, it's about the future, it's about the environment, it's about the community, it helps us remain grounded. And then focusing, taking the steps, this walking, this making the path to achieve those small tidbits, to achieve those small goals that will do what? Give us positive reinforcement. And then doing the work. Now, I recognize that this is not easy. I told you I was irritated by the notion of hope. Hope is not linear. And sometimes the appropriate reaction is not hope, as a matter of fact. In the anatomy of hope, the Groupman says hope does not arise from being told to think positively or from hearing an overtly rosy forecast. Hope, unlike optimism, is rooted in an unalloyed reality. He says, hope is the elevating feeling we experience when we see in the mind's eye a path to a better future. Hope acknowledges the significant obstacles and deep pitfalls along the path. And we keep moving. And to do so, it's important to have an anchor. Who is going to check up on you when you're depleted? Who's going to have your back? Who will you catch when they're about to fall? It is no accident, and I shared this poem with those of you who came last year, the poem about our caravan is not one of hopelessness, of despair by Rumi. It is no accident that in the middle of that poem, he says, our caravan. He's talking about the community and the collective. Come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of living, it doesn't matter. And he says, ours is not a caravan of despair, right? Come, even if you have broken your vows 1,000 times, come yet again, come and come. And I want to, we're coming to an end. I have a couple more slides, but I want to pause right now. And I started with this question of how are you? And I want to really come back full circle to this question again. And so I'm going to invite you once again to share how you are feeling right now. And again, I'm going to put that into the chats, and I'm inviting you to put into the chat how you're feeling, either into the chat or into the into Menti. I'm going to give you just another minute. So the reason I wanted to do this is I want to show you an example of what just happened. This is an example of what just happened, and I want to go and so I've done a lot of these webinars, and I always start with how are you? And we're tired, we're traumatized, we're feeling exhausted, we're feeling depleted. And I also notice, just from reading the chat, that there is a shift, right? There is a shift, and it's going back to this interpersonal neurobiology. So this is an example of a webinar that I did, and I asked at the beginning, how are you doing? How are you feeling? And we're exhausted, we're feeling tired, etc. And towards the end, what I asked is, again, and what you could see here is this interaction, this being with the community, this empowered by knowledge, it shifts the focus. It doesn't take away the fact that we're tired. It doesn't take away the fact that we are feeling depleted and scared and stressed, but it shifts the focus. So we could hold on to, we could have two realities. We're feeling depleted and we also have hope and we feel gratitude. This is an example that what it means to use the power of interpersonal neurobiology to help us connect, to help us feel that sense of hope. So the last thing I want to say is we started with this notion or theme of walking, and I want to end with that. And it's again Jalaluddin Rumi who says, keep walking. Though there is no place to get to, don't try to see through the distance. That's not for human beings. Move within, but don't move the way fear makes you move. Today, like every other day, we wake up empty and frightened. Don't open the door to the study and begin reading. Take down a musical instrument. Let the beauty we love be what we do. There are hundreds of ways to kneel and kiss the ground. And with that, I want to thank you for joining me. We have time for a community conversation. We have time for questions and answers. We have time to celebrate. And I'm going to stop sharing right now and invite you to either raise your hand or put your question in the chat. And we will continue. Thank you, everyone. Let's see here.